Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Holly Wood, and I attend the University of California, Merced, and this is for COGS 180. And my presentation today will be based off of embodied approaches. So let's start off with something simple, such as the definition. So the definition of embodied cognition is best described as a broad term used to describe a class of theories within cognitive science, many of which emphasize the importance of sensory motor experiences gained through our bodily interactions within the environment for acquiring and representing conceptual knowledge. To the right, we have a diagram kind of describing like different systems and how we receive commands and how we send feedback. This can be different for everyone. It's just something that I kind of found that I thought was interesting with our sensory receptors, our controller, which is our nerves, our mechanical system, which is the way like our body moves in our task environment. I just thought that was interesting. So sensory motor experience. So to the left, we have embodied view, and to the right, we have non-embodiment view. So embodied view is tightly linked and more relevant to concrete concepts. So an example would be relying on a recipe on taste, a recipe relying on taste. So you're kind of adding what you want to add into that recipe, and you pretty much get it based off of like the taste of it. You're tasting it to rely on like how well you present that. A non-embodied view is separated. The sensory motors are not involved with cognitive processing. This is important for infants and small children development. Example would be the way an angel thinks using symbols due to not having bodies. There are two slides when talking about sensory motor experiences, those that are tight and that are together, and those that are loose and separated, as stated above. The example was given by Professor Kroom that I liked, and it gives a good understanding of non-embodiment versus embodiment. So weak embodiment versus strong embodiment. Sensory motors activation is necessary. This is considered a strong embodiment, and the motor part is a byproduct, which is considered weak. We need them initially, then not too important. That's also a weak one. If modality independent semantic areas and action perception system exchange the information they process, then they later must receive semantic information from the former, be allowed to process, enrich and ground this information with / and information about actions and perceptions, and send the results enhanced semantic information back. So with that being said, the meaning between weak and strong embodiments. This expresses the use of weak and strong embodiment through sensory motors. The examples explain how we interpret weak and strong embodiments, such as weak being how we need those sensory motors, and then they become less important later, versus strong being how we need the sensory motors to be active when dealing with embodiment. So abstract concepts in children learning. Linguistic symbols are important. Perceptual symbols, specific content like the sound of a dog, rely on words versus sensory motor experiences, development and degrades throughout time. Infants and embodied learners use sensory motors to gain knowledge about their surroundings. As we may know, how abstract concepts are concepts that we cannot physically see. So this is why linguistic symbols and representations are super important, because we pretty much rely on getting a picture based off of what we're being described or told. This is how linguistic plays a role when dealing with embodied cognition. We tend to rely more on descriptions to get the point across of what is being said or described to us. Just like I mentioned in my other teach back about democracy being an abstract concept, this is where we focus more on perceptual symbols for a specific content, like the way something feels, tastes, and sounds, such as the perceptual symbols with a specific content, like the sound of a dog. So if you specifically are talking about dogs, we can describe them as the way they feel as furry, the way they sound when they bark, and even potentially that the way they look. So developing embodied cognition. This is based on the environment you are in. Environment seems to play a key role, especially just growing up in general, and anything with your mind. Environment seems to play a very key role. Concepts are changing throughout our sensory motor and how we present it. Using verbs, nouns, and adjectives, actions are being performed or observed. Objects help develop this concept, such as a toy. Mapping words and learning words through objects helps develop embodied cognition, and body posture plays a role as well. This is essential when a child is at a young age. The embodied cognition is constantly developing during these times, as our brain is developing at these times as we are younger, and even still today, our brain is constantly developing. A lot of small things matter in this area, such as a body posture, like I mentioned, our sensory motors, and even the environment we are in. These are some of the things that we discussed in class, and also the articles you read for this lecture dealing with developing embodied cognitions. That's where I pulled some of these things together and found it really interesting how our environment plays a key factor in even something so small such as our body posture. So symbolic representation. We as people use symbols when developing cognition. Symbols help us remember things and to learn those things. Examples, if we associate the word round, we could use the round object such as a ball to learn the word and the meaning. Then we can add the verb, noun, or adjective when explaining the object. The ball is pretty and blue. So what is a symbolic representation? This is a symbol that represents something. For example, how a flag represents our state, our country. Also, the way we use this embodiment can be described as how we see things and their meaning, like the examples above stated. So adding an action word gives it a better picture when describing something. And also this tends to be your own opinion about an object, because not everyone has the same viewpoints on things such as the ball being pretty. Some people could think the ball is not pretty. So it all pretty much depends on your own opinion also when describing symbolic representation. The new study / the Smith study. The Smith study was a study that we had read about in our lecture about developing cognition and new approaches to cognition. That was just a Smith study, which is kind of like my study, but similar. So the study that I would predict would be 20 children in a room learning a new word. Half will interact with an object, while the other half will have the object be described to them. So how many children will learn the new word more easily through an object? My hypothesis being stated is I believe that the kids who interact with the object will remember what the object is and learn the new word versus those who do not interact with the object. The plan of study conduct would be I would conduct the study based off of my hypothesis and see how many children would learn interacting with objects versus being told what the object is. And then I would see where the study was more successful and why it was more successful. So having a little sister who's in the prime time of her learning years, I could possibly test this on her just to see her reaction and what she does better with. Me describing something new to her that she doesn't know yet, like a new word she doesn't know. She is in kindergarten, so she is learning new vocabulary words. So maybe I can describe a word to her, or maybe even an object that she's never seen before, such as a different shape that she's never seen, a more complementary shape, a more complex shape, and see how if she learns it more by me describing it to her and if she remembers what it is, or if I physically have the shape and presenting it to her to see which way she could potentially learn it more. I think this idea is amazing, and it's interesting to see how kids learn and develop in their own way. This also can be based off their environment and many other factors, as simple as their posture. So we read about in our embodied cognition approaches, we read about how body posture can play into a factor of children learning and developing. As we may know, body posture symbolizes like that we are paying attention, we are sitting up straight, and we are sitting forward, which means having good body posture means that you are alert. So I found that interesting how body posture plays a role in when kids are learning to actually enhance their learning and make it into a positive way of learning as well. So just a little bit more about my study extended. The study would be interesting to conduct and to see the outcome. Young children between the ages of 4 to 6 are the ideal target when doing this study. These are when children, even younger, I can go 2 to 6. I just would feel like I'd want to get when the kids are first learning to talk and get their motor senses going versus when the kids are kind of already at that stage but not quite advanced yet. So I feel like a good age would be anywhere from 2 to 6. And also virtual learning in today's time. So this is also a time where it comes most important, especially with young children, due to the circumstances we are in with online school and this COVID-19 this year. The kids are not actually interacting with one another, so they're not really, it's really hard. Developing cognition as a child plays a big role, especially now more than ever, due to them not physically being able to interact with other people other than their families. They're not physically seeing the things that are going on unless you are lucky enough to have those things or and safe enough to have your student or your kid be able to go to school like that. So I feel like this is such an important and crucial time, especially this year when dealing with embodied cognition and developing cognition, because it is important as the mind is growing and learning these new things in order for you to learn and grow new things, and especially now. So some philosophical implications. Quote, one might argue that the dependence between our spatial concepts and our bodies identified above is mundane and unremarkable. Proponents of embodied cognitions must minimally show that front and up dependent on the body in some senses that Descartes would deny, end quote. This main idea is dealing with our brain side and cognition rather than our body itself. This is showing the logical side of things. As we learn how embodied approaches in cognition and linguistics, and I also believe that artificial intelligence plays a part in how quickly you can learn and gain concepts of things. My topic draws more towards young children and embodied cognition, and this is how it shows them in, either shows them progressing or degressing, depending on what they're grasping, what they're learning, and maybe what they're not learning, what we can do so they can enhance these embodied cognitions. Implications of these findings. So this is social implications. This is implications of the findings support the body as disputers' thesis and place primary emphasis on the view that properties of language learning process heavily depend on the environmental and social conditions. So this relies back onto environmental and social conditions. Within the world and other individuals regulate language functioning, and this functioning is inseparably linked to exploits the affordances of the situation within language processes take place, end quote. But with that being said, stated above, our social implications are super important when developing language. This falls back on the thesis of how environment impacts how we use language and learn it as well. Also, how we're being engaged with within our community and within ourselves. Being engaged with what's going on around you is an important factor when dealing with embodied approaches with younger children, also as adults. They take into sight of what's around them to help them learn and develop cognition. And you can do this even now, especially when you're developing. You look around the room and see what this is, and you figure it out and you learn. Or maybe you see mom or dad using this, and you think, oh, okay, well that's used to, let's see, for example, a mixing bowl. Okay, that's used to mix a bowl. The children are involved with what's going on around them and their surroundings. For example, their toys, the way they describe them and the way they play with them. That's another example. Could be for children playing with their toys, which is surrounding them, and it depends on their environment and the way that they're used, language is being used around them as well. Practical implications. Quote, whereas sensory motors in activism advocates the perceptual experience is made possible by the possession and skillful exercise of practical knowledge of sensory motor cognitions. The other variants consider the talk of somewhat consistent with a theory of mind that ground traditional cognitive science. In this radical expression, the inactive thinking maintains the mentality is to be explained in terms of direct environment involving bodies engagements. This implication plays off my study of how children use their own representations of things and what they observe. For example, the ball and the color of the ball. Also, more advanced learning is words describing what the ball can be used for and what the ball is. The practical outcome of cognitive learning. This is the practical outcome of cognitive learning, excuse me. In my opinion, I feel like this is a more like the more relaxed implications because it's more like based off of what you know and your experience and based off of how you represent things from your own self by observing things. I feel like this is the more relaxed and calm implication that's not so like, I mean, it's important, but not so like important as much as like social and as much as like social and the other implications, philosophical. So some more extended research, quote, further of a theory emphasizing the importance of embodiment across a lifespan would propose the role of embodiment in conceptual processing is always present. The influence of sensory-motor experience does not stop or change fundamentally throughout development. It just may become more refined and flexible over time. Embodied cognition is not only to be there for a certain period of time, yet there from the beginning and tends to grow in us when we develop and learn new things. Then it goes away over time. This topic is very broad and has a lot of opinions when dealing with cognitive thinking. This way is also different when learning how you interpret based off of your living situation, where you were raised. For example, embodied approaches is also important when dealing with verbs, nouns, and adjectives. I never really knew or understood until I read more about it, but how verbs, nouns, and adjectives play a major role when learning because these are words that are being used that are more easy and like they catch on. So you learn these words more frequently and more quickly because they're action words or they're quick, short words, which help us develop in our mind, which help the children also develop and learn quickly because they're using action words such as nouns. Some more extended research based off what I was previously talking about nouns on children concepts and word learning. These are easier to learn and understand. Quote, young children's vocabularies contain a disproportionately large number of nouns and a small number, of verbs relative to the frequency within both types of words typically occur in discourse. Why does our vocabulary contain more nouns than verbs? It is said how nouns are used more frequently than verbs and also learned and interpretedly more easier for younger kids. They grow and become more aware of their words as well. So as a younger children, it's easier for them to get the idea of a noun versus a verb, a person, a place, or thing that they can see or describe, such as mom is a person, store is a place, a fruit is a thing. So just like the picture below describes. Also, a lot of people have different meanings for their same word. This depends on your family and your environment. Culture also plays a role when dealing with a child's vocabulary and learning to talk. Culture and environment would be the two biggest impacts when dealing with cognitive ignition, in my opinion, because cognitive ignition is cognitive cognition is pretty much based off of the way your brain is developing and the way you think and the way you interpret things. And I feel like your culture and where you were raised and how you were raised, if in your family environment, plays a major role in this because, like mentioned before, you could have different meanings for different things when other people could have those different meanings for those different things. That's when it starts to get tricky in some aspects as well to like, is it really cognition? So it just gets tricky. But I feel like those are the two main things that play a major role. This is my works cited page. We got the what is embodied about cognition from Bradford and Mahone, developing embodied cognition from Michelle Welsby and Penny Pexman, the embodied cognition Stanford Encyclopedia, and Why Nouns Triumph Verbs and Words Learning by Thomas Bicken. So yeah, that was the end of my slideshow, and I hope you guys all have a great rest of your night. And thank you for watching.